Welcome to Politically Unstable with Charles Hurt, Washington Times opinion editor. I'm your host, Andy Parks, and I'd like to remind you that you qualify for a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times simply by going to washingtontimes.com/Andy. That's washingtontimes.com/ANDY. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the star of the show, Charles Hurt, Washington Times opinion editor. Hello, Charlie.
Hey, Andy. How you doing, buddy?
Doing fine. Biden's team's Cedric Richmond blames GOP for defunding the police. God, that's funny. I'm sorry.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And we talk about this a lot. You're always wondering, are they lying? Are they joking? Or have they completely lost their minds? And I think that in this case, like a combination, obviously they're always lying. I don't think they're joking. Although I do think that they laugh. I think they laugh at, like, the press when so many people in the press take what they say seriously. Yeah. I think they must sit around and, like, have a drink in the back smoky rooms, and they must start laughing at how stupid and gullible so many people in the press are. But the other thing is the amount of attention and thought that goes into these lies about trying to blame Republicans for this massive crime wave, claiming that they support defunding the police. You know, there's a psychotic break. So at some point, if you dabble this much for this long, so emphatically in the land of make-believe and hysteria, then I think it really does corrode these people's ability. I really do think it's a mental snap that goes off in their brains. And I think that's what we saw with Cedric Richmond this weekend, trying to pin all this stuff on Republicans.
Yep. Blaming the Republicans will stick, though, if we let it. And we should have learned this in the past because Democrats know that the media has their back. The defund the police movement by the left has backfired on them big time. So this is their only out. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think it's a really shrewd point. It will stick. I mean, look at the whole, like, Russia thing. Mm-hmm. The whole Russia thing, everybody who's not totally delusional knows that was all a massive lie at this point, and that many in the press were pushing it even though they knew it was a massive lie. But look at the damage that it did anyway. What was it that Mark Twain said that, you know, a lie will go around the world 3 times before the truth gets its boots on in the morning? And it's true. And that's a perfect example of it. And so yeah, I do think that it can happen, and, you know, so many people will pick it up. But when you get into the particulars of what Cedric Richmond and others in the Biden administration have been claiming, what they claim is that there was some massive omnibus bill that was for, you know, billions and billions of dollars that included all of this massive pork spending for cities that Republicans opposed back in, I think, 2019. But, you know, the most devastating thing you can do with these people is to take them seriously and sort of pick their argument apart because it becomes so ridiculous. And the reason that cops are not defunded in these cities has nothing to do with Republicans or federal money. It has to do with Democrats at the federal level trashing cops, demanding that the police departments be defunded, supporting lawbreakers, supporting rioters, supporting BLM, and then Democrats at the local levels cutting off funding to police departments and basically creating an atmosphere where police are fleeing, good, honorable police officers are fleeing police departments around the country and don't want to stand up to criminals because they know that the political class doesn't have their back. That's defunding the police. The problem is not federal, some bill in Congress. It has to do with the hateful, disgusting, racist rhetoric from people like Nancy Pelosi all the way throughout Congress and down to, local levels against police. And it has to do with the decisions that these local Democrats, Biden supporters, politicians made at local levels to make sure, to cut off that funding and to create an atmosphere where police officers are bailing out of police departments. And I don't blame them. I mean, would you work as a cop today? Would you risk your life as a cop today?
Nope.
I sure as hell wouldn't.
Nope. 93% of capacity at most police departments across the U.S. So they actually have the funding right now to hire more people, but they can't get them.
Yeah, and it's no wonder. I mean, you think about these, and this is the lesson to me when you look at the George Floyd thing. I think the vast majority of people look at that and they saw a very tragic outcome. I would imagine that Derek Chauvin's mother looked at that video and saw a very tragic outcome. There is no doubt about that. And if there's something reasonable and sober to be done about it, I think most people would agree that, okay, well, let's evaluate what happened here. Perhaps the most important lesson out of that whole horrible tragedy was it reminds us and reveals in stark detail the impossibly difficult job that cops have every single day. Just a routine call to a Bass Mart where somebody passed a bad $20 bill, and it leads inexorably toward having to detain somebody and put them in the back of a cruiser. And when he resists, this is what happens. It's horrible, and maybe there are procedures that you can change that might have prevented the guy from dying. I'm sure Derek Chauvin would give any amount of money to go back and to have done something to avoided that.
Yeah.
But the fact remains, cops have impossibly difficult jobs to do every single day, and that's not the police officer's fault. That's the fault of the political class. That's a lot of people's fault, from public school system to city governments to politicians in Washington. A lot of people have a lot of responsibility for the situation that we wound up in. And I think it's so interesting that all anybody wants to talk about is this one thing, but they don't want to talk about the far larger societal problem of a guy who, ingested drugs in his anus and trying to pass fake $20 bills. And there are a whole lot of problems here.
Yeah.
It wasn't just police restraint.
There are two sides to every story,
well,
and he played a major role in that story.
Yeah, and Andy, it's not. They don't forget it, and maybe they're too stupid to know it, but they don't forget it. These people saw an opportunity to weaponize this story, to weaponize the tragic death of a human, and they twisted into political purposes. It wasn't that they forgot there were all this other culpability. It's that they chose instead to use it for their own political advantage. And also, here's the other thing. The other motive for creating this whole thing, this political distraction about BLM and all this kind of stuff, the other thing is, because if you're not talking about that, you're talking about the responsibility that Nancy Pelosi has and Democrats have in these big cities that have created this environment where this kind of stuff happens. If we're not talking about how racist cops are or whatever it is that they're making up, if we're not talking about that, we might start talking about how much blood is on big city Democrats' hands who have had a far larger role in creating this mess than any cop in any city or anywhere ever did.
Yep. Folks, you can read the column, Biden's team's Cedric Richmond blames GOP for defunding the police. You can go to WashingtonTimes.com. As Washington Times opinion editor, I'm sure perhaps you arm wrestled Donald Trump a little bit to write a column?
Anytime you can get former commander-in-chief to write something for our paper is a good thing. And this is actually a really great column that he wrote. And it really is true. President Trump did more than any president in American history to secure that border. And obviously there were still problems, but he did more to stop the critical emergency at the border than any other president in history. And Joe Biden single-handedly, out of willful hatefulness of the country and willful stupidity, undid all of that and manufactured massive crisis at the border, all for political purposes, because he cares more about enforcing borders in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria than he does America's borders. And that pretty much tells you all you need to know about the guy.
Yep, that's true. All right, Charlie, always good to talk to you, my friend. We'll do it again next week.
Sounds good. Great talking to you.
Thanks for listening to Politically Unstable with Charlie Hurt. Remember, you can read all of Charlie's columns at WashingtonTimes.com. And while you're there, check out the excellent selection of podcasts. I'm Andy Parks. Have a great day.